السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. سعد الله مساكم جميعا، بارك عليكم الشهر الكريم. نتمنى من الله أن يعيننا وإياكم على صيامه وقيامه، وأن يجعلنا وإياكم من عتقاء من النار. Dear colleagues, honorable audience, and our main and distinguished guests, on behalf of Ittisal PR Association Chairman and member of the Board of Directors, I welcome you to Ittisal first program for the second quarter on this year, which is the Reputation Management Seminar, in collaboration with our main and distinguished guest, Mr. Nicolas Trade. Allow me, before we start, to take advantage of this opportunity and introduce the association, its goals, and some of what we have done in the past period. Ittisal PR Association is an occupational association registered with the Ministry of Labor and Social Development that aims to advance the public relation industry by developing its practitioners through applying best practices and sharing the latest knowledge in the field. Ittisal is located in the largest industrial city in the world and the Kingdom Industrial Jewel, Jubail Industrial City. The association was established as an independent entity at the beginning of year 2020, but our experience as team far precede this date, and the beginnings was almost 14 years ago, where we're represented as the Jubail PR Association, which was basically a personal initiative by public relation and corporate communication employees in Jubail companies and at the Royal Commission of Jubail. After that, the association developed over the years to become IPRA, International Public Relations Association, Jubail branch, then transforming after a few years to its current status as a separate and independent entity. In 2020, as you all know, the association carried out many various virtual programs and events, despite the challenges that faced the public relation industry and the world in general. Among these activities was the best public relation practices forum and the best corporate communication practices forum. In addition to that, and in regards to the pandemic situation, Ittisal has risen up to the occasion and has undertaken many initiatives and efforts, some of which are communication related and other related to social responsibility, participating in supporting the Ministry of Health efforts by publishing all of the content on how to prevent the virus and the various procedures to deal with it. In addition to that, the association has formed a special committee to raise awareness and educate about the threats and dangers of the pandemic. In 2021, we have our hands full with a busy event and program calendar that we are going to deal with as project-to-project basis, and will announce each and every program accordingly. And now, allow me please to welcome our main distinguished guest and partner in tonight's seminar, Mr. Nicolas Trade. Abu Muhammad. Nicolas Trade, or Mr. Nicolas Trade, is a co-founder of Reputational company, previously known as Reputation Institute. If you can give me a second, أنا الشاشة كنا راحت شوي. Mr. Nicolas is a board director at the Reputational company. Also is an advises multinational companies and cities and countries on area of reputation management, global affairs, country and cities reputation, and corporate branding, employees branding, corporate social responsibility, ESG, sustainability, and human resources. Nicolas speaks and writes regularly on best practices in communication and marketing, and has featured on CNN, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Bloomberg, and many more. In addition to that, Mr. Nicolas is is a speaker at the World Economic Forum in Davos. In tonight seminar, we're going to start exactly in 2 minutes. Mr. Nicolas will start his main topics and will take approximately around an hour and 15 minutes. After that, we'll open the door for a question and Q&As, questions and answer, and we'll deal with it as a question-to-question basis. So question will be asked and we'll answer accordingly, and etc. And for now, I can leave the floor for Mr. Nicolas, please.
Thank you so much. So, hello everyone. Turkey, I think if possible, I need to be able to share my screen and also show my camera. I think you need to allow me to do that. But good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you here today on the topic of brand and reputation management. I've worked with this topic for more than 20 years, and I'm happy to share some of my experiences with you here today. I am based in Copenhagen, but I represent the RepTrack company, which I founded back about 20 years ago. And today I help, as Mr. Turki just said, a number of the largest organizations in the world, also countries and cities, on managing, and by managing I mean both improving and protecting reputation, and that's what I wanted to talk with you about here today. Here we go. So I'll just start my video. I think what we want to do here today is, and so we just need to allow me to share my screen as well. What I wanted to do here today was to make it as interactive as possible, and by that I mean please don't hesitate to put any questions that you might have into the chat room, in which case I will try to answer the questions that come up as we move along throughout my presentation. I'll try not to bore you too much with too many slides, so hopefully there will be some good questions that we can have some interaction with, and if not, as Mr. Turki said, we will have the questions in the end, and you can ask whatever you want. Really, this is supposed to be an interactive session where you're allowed to ask any questions that you want within the area of reputation management, and I'll do my best to answer them. We do work with a number of companies and organizations in the region already, and I just wanted to show that in my slides. Here we go, it's still disabled. But we do a lot of work with Saudi Aramco. We've done it for many, many years. We've worked with them since 2013. And so what we do for them is really help them on the first hand as step one to identify the most important stakeholders for the commercial success of Saudi Aramco, and then we go out and help them understand their reputation. So Saudi Aramco's reputation, or SABIC, we also work for SABIC. We work for the Saudi International Partnership Organization, SCISP. And so what we do for them on the one hand is, as I said, define which are the key stakeholder groups that will help them drive commercial success. And then we go out and measure the reputation of those organizations among those stakeholder groups. And then we help them plan. How do we improve? How do we protect our reputation with these different audiences in different markets around the world? It doesn't have to be a global project. It doesn't have to be as big a company as Saudi Aramco. I think any company, big or small, needs to worry about its reputation and how its stakeholder groups perceive the organization. And still disabled screen sharing, so it's difficult for me to share the presentation. But I'll just keep talking until I can share the actual slides. I think you saw the agenda, and the purpose of today was really for me to ensure that you got an understanding of what reputation is, but also, and so a little bit on the context side. So what do we mean about reputation? What's happening in the world today in regards to branding and reputation? but then move very quickly into making it more tangible and actionable, and so provide you with some a toolbox, if you will, that can help you work with reputation in your particular organizations. So Turkey, I don't know how I'm supposed to share my my screen. It's still disabled. Someone needs to help me share my screen.
Of course, of course. Abu Muhammad, Karaman.
We are working on that. Just give me a second, please.
Perfect. Okay. So in regards to just our organization, some of the things that I wanted to show you as well today, and which I have a few slides on, is on the one hand, which are the companies that have a good and bad reputation in the kingdom, in Saudi Arabia. So we measured the reputation of the largest organizations in Saudi Arabia. We also recently released a big study that we did on the reputation of the 100 largest companies in the world, which we measured the reputations of among the G8 countries, or G7 and Russia. And so what we basically did there was we went out into the general public of these different markets, and we asked them a set of questions in order to understand what the reputation of these organizations are. And so we published that around the world. We've been talking about it on various different channels as well. And I'll show you some of the results of that here today as well.
If you allow me, Nicolas, and before we can start the presentation, I think it might be useful to start with the importance of reputation, especially that the majority of our audience tonight is a member of public relation and corporate communication departments. And the majority, or 90% of what they are doing day in, day out, is about building a reputation, one way or another, whether that to be in media engagement, or CSR, or internal communication and building loyalty, and the concept of a one family company, or either that being PR initiatives and program and external communication or exhibition and conferences.
Well, first and foremost, just in regards to the importance of it, I want to make sure that everybody gets my point of view on reputation, which is that reputation should be seen as a means to the end. It's not the end goal in and of itself. So an organization needs to use its reputation in order to improve reputation, in order to improve stakeholder support. So whatever you do out there, obviously you're looking to get people to do something for you, whether it's clients that you want to buy services or products from you, or you want them to recommend a product, or it might be investors, you want them to invest in your company or recommend investment, or you want people to come and work for you, or you want your employees to obviously be ambassadors of the company. So a company has many different stakeholder groups with whom it's trying to improve its reputation. So that's one aspect of it. So in that sense, obviously reputation is highly linked to commercial success. If you know as an organization which are the most important stakeholders for a company, for example, Saudi Aramco, it's very important that all their employees are engaged in what Saudi Aramco is trying to do. It's also important for them that investors out there are talking positively about Saudi Aramco and obviously recommending the stock to other investors. It's also important for Saudi Aramco to attract the best talent. So it's out there communicating what they are trying to do in order to get people to work for them. So many different stakeholders, but it's impossible for them to communicate with them in a professional manner unless they know the starting point. And the starting point is really, what is the perception of these people of Saudi Aramco and Saudi Arabia for that matter. So we also measure the reputation of Saudi Arabia in different parts of the world in order to integrate that into the planning of PR and comms and strategy of Saudi Aramco, SABIC, and all the other companies in the region that we work with. So I think that's definitely important to understand. And I think many organizations out there don't do that. They don't measure, and you can't manage what you don't know. And so if you don't know your reputation, it's impossible to manage it. So we obviously urge all organizations, whether using our tool or some other tool, to go out and make sure that you're on an ongoing basis trying to understand what the perceptions of your stakeholders is of your organization, and then integrate that into the decision-making processes of PR or marketing or branding or whatever discipline we are talking about. I see way too many global organizations and local organizations who are blindly thinking they know without actually knowing, and there's a huge gap then between what you're trying to communicate and how people are actually perceiving you. You need to try and close that gap, and you can only close that gap if you know what they perceive you as and what they expect from you as an organization, right? Is it that you're an ethical company? Is it that you're an innovative company? Is it that you treat your employees well? Is it that you're great in terms of financial performance? Is it that you have a great vision for the future? Is it that you have great products? It could be any of those different things. And so you need to know which of those things is it that would drive people, whichever stakeholder group we're talking about, in whichever region of the world we're talking about, in order to drive support from those stakeholder groups. So make sure you've measured in order to drive.
Yeah, Nicolas, you can now share your presentation.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, here we go. Are you seeing the next slide as well, or are you seeing the big screen?
You can change it to display screen.
Display screen. Okay, let's see how I do that.
On the left here, swap display. On the left.
There you go. Swap display.
Yeah.
There you go.
Good luck.
Okay, thank you.
So hopefully, Nicolas, today we're going to discover together the guideline on how to build a reputation and the KPI to measure that.
Yeah, I'll do my best, Turkey. And if there are any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate. I did want to provide you with some input on some evidence as to, because oftentimes I hear organizations ask me, so why would I bother about reputation, right? So I have a few slides that shows you the correlation or the impact on business success that reputation can have. And so I'll start with that pieces of evidence just to give you that ammunition, because when you go to your CFO and you ask for budget, they're going to ask you, so why would I want to invest in that? And so you need some ammunition. And so we agreed that we would provide that to you today. And obviously I'll share my presentation with the team. Turkey, I'll make sure to send that to you afterwards so everyone has it. So let's go. So first, RepTrack company, we've been here for a long time. We measure a lot of different organizations every year, 7,000 organizations, their reputations among their different stakeholder groups. We also measure the reputation of a lot of cities and a lot of countries and a lot of CEOs. And what we do is we help organizations not only measure and understand the data, but it's also to digest the information and then improve on the one hand, but also protect reputation on the other. And so we have different models in order to do that. One, obviously a scorecard that helps you, which is basically a questionnaire for cities, another one for organizations, another one for countries, another one for corporations. So different questions to understand reputation for different organizations. But here are the questions we set out to answer for you here today. So I'll do my best to answer them throughout the presentation. What's reputation in my definition? But again, if you ask 100 different professors and professionals around the world, you'll get 100 different answers. So this is just my perspective, and so you can take it or leave it or take it for what it's worth. How does reputation compare to brand? I promise just to give my view on that. Again, many different views on that, but I have mine. Why is it important? Why would I bother? And why should CFOs agree to invest money behind it? Then on to how to measure and manage it, which is where we get into the toolbox and what you can do specifically in order to manage it. If anything, I'll provide you with this here today, right? So you can basically see this slide, and then everything else is just supporting what I'm showing you here today. Best practices, what are global companies and also local companies doing, and countries and cities, in order to manage their reputation? Well, first, they know who their stakeholders are. And it's not enough just to say investors or, consumers. You need to be much more specific. You need to understand exactly who is it that would help your CEO drive success for the company. So that's the number one thing you need to make sure that you have. And I hope you all out there, if you work in PR and communications, that you've worked on identifying stakeholders, but make sure that you know exactly who they are and what it is that you're looking to get from them, right? It's not just enough to identify them, but I mean, it could be NGOs. Well, what exactly are you looking for NGOs to do for you? Or consumers or investors? I think that's more obvious. You want investors to invest and recommend, consumers to buy and recommend. But for the other stakeholder groups, you need to be specific on what it is you're looking to get from them. And the reason for that is that in the analyses, when you do measure reputation, you need to know what exactly is it that would drive them to do that for you. And that comes from doing the research. Use objective, holistic scorecard to understand perceptions. So you need to make sure that you get someone else to measure your reputation. Not us necessarily, someone local, if you're local, but certainly get someone else to take a view on your reputation for you instead of doing it yourself. And it needs to be holistic, meaning it needs to be on various different dimensions, because when people think about an organization, they think about more things than just product and price. They also think about the organization behind the product. And so you need to have a holistic scorecard that helps you understand 360 what people are thinking about your organization. Make sure that you integrate those, and this is the third bullet, integrate that into messaging and positioning of your company. Make sure that you're testing the different channels that you use. Are you using social media? Are you using PR? Or are you using marketing to drive perception? How much money are you spending relatively on the different channels that you have in order to drive impact? Because you're looking for impact on perception in order to get them to do for you what you want them to do. So this needs to be adjusted. This is very difficult to do because different stakeholders have different expectations and they might not align. And so this takes some time, but it's very important that you're measuring in order to understand what should I be communicating, through which channels, using which activities. And I'll get further into that as I go throughout my presentation. Make people accountable for your reputation, build KPIs into the MBOs, all right? So unless you have someone accountable for something, they'll never do it. So you need to make sure that some of these KPIs that you might be building on the back of the research is built into the objectives. MBOs are managing by objectives, the objectives of the people in the organization. Otherwise, they'll never do for you what you're asking them to do. And finally, you need to track progress, right? You need to see whether you're moving the needle or not. Whether, in PR, you need to figure out whether, in fact, you're getting people to think more positively about you through the things that you're doing. It's not enough just to measure clicks on your social media channels. So that's the best practice piece of it. And again, I urge you all to just pump questions into chat, and I'll make sure to answer them throughout the presentation as we go along. But these are the best practices that organizations out there are using. If you use this, which is super difficult, then you're on your way to managing your reputation and protecting it. What is reputation? Well, it's an emotional bond that ensures your stakeholders do for you what you want them to do. And that can either be success or it can be failure, right? It can either work for you or it can work against you. So you want consumers or customers to buy your products and services. You want the general public to give you the benefit of the doubt and say something positive about you. You want regulators to give you license to operate in different markets or domestically. You want the financial community to invest in you if you're floating on the stock exchange. You want media to report favorably on your company. All of these things are driven by reputation, by the way in which people perceive you. They will choose to work with you instead of someone else if you have a better reputation than the others. So employees obviously align with your corporate brand purpose, the better your reputation is. So these are the different things that we're trying to drive. And so this is a reputation model. This is the RepTrack model, and this is the scorecard, if you will, we use in order to measure the reputation of a company. It has 7 factors, and then it has a number of different drivers within it. So, and the way in which they came about, these 7 different buckets, if you will, is by asking groups like yourselves, which are the best and worst reputed companies in your country. And so if I were there with you today and we were doing a workshop, I would ask you that question. Which company in Saudi Arabia has the best reputation, right? And you would give me an answer, and I would ask you, so why is that? And you would be going, well, they have a great leader, or they have great products, or they're super ethical, or they have great social programs, whatever it might be. So different things people think of when they think of a company, but these are the 7 aggregators that people in general think of. Products and services is one, innovation is another, workplace is a third, governance, citizenship, leadership, and performance. And within them, you see the different questions in a questionnaire. Under products and services, you have whether the organization stands behind its products, whether it has high quality products, whether it's value for money, whether it meets customer needs. So all these questions in a questionnaire will give you an understanding of what your reputation is and that of your benchmarks. So make sure you include benchmarks into your survey in order to understand how you compare with your peers. Reputation is a cross-industry topic. So many people come to me and say, isn't it a B2C thing, this reputation? And no, it definitely is not. But isn't it only for telcos, or isn't it only for pharma? No, it's not. We work for many different companies around the world, as you see here. I see we haven't even included Aramco under energy and industrial. But anyway, here you see a variety of different organizations across different industries, in addition to them being both B2B and B2C. So being a B2B company is not an excuse for not working with your reputation. And I say that only because I've heard it from B2Bs in the past. And just very quickly on brand and reputation, what is the difference between the two? And so the way in which we view it is that brand comes from within. It's an inside-out perspective. Brand is how you want to brand yourself, is what you're communicating to the world, whereas perceptions is the consequence of what you're doing as an organization, or the industry you're in, or the country in which you're headquartered, right? So your reputation is held by your stakeholders. You own your brand yourself. And so you're trying to close the gap between what it is you're trying to become as a company and how it is that people, they perceive you. That's the difference that we see. And so here you have it in another way. So the way you express yourself is you as an organization. You say a lot of things via third-party PR or directly via branding and marketing, or the things that you do or the products that you sell. But how do people then react to the things that you do as an organization is what we label stakeholder perceptions or reputation. And the trick here is obviously to close the gap and make sure that your brand reflects the expectations of your stakeholder. Oftentimes that's not the case, but you want to make sure that what you're doing and saying obviously is in sync, is synchronized, is aligned with what it is your clients want. And how does it work? So here you have the model, the RepTrack model to the far left. That's how people, they think about an organization. They think about an organization through rational things, right? So they say they have great products, innovation, etc. The 7 dimensions that I told you about before. They drive how people feel about you. And so the way we measure reputation at the high level is by asking these 4 questions: overall esteem, admiration and respect, trust, and good feeling. We ask those 4 questions in a questionnaire. We create an average from it, and then we provide a score to a Saudi Aramco from 0 to 100, and that tells them what their score is in any given country with any given stakeholder group. The better you are at figuring out which of those think factors, which of those 7 things is it that drives the feeling, the better in return, you'll get stakeholder support or business impact on your far right, which is where you're trying to get people to purchase, recommend, give you benefit of the doubt, verbally support, invest, license to operate, work for, etc. I hope that makes sense now. What we're using reputation for is a means to the end, it's not the end goal. Just as brand is not the end goal, it's in order to get other people to do something for you. So this is how we conceptually understand it. There's a question here, I think it's in Arabic. And so there's a question here, how does reputation differ from corporate image? Well, it doesn't differ very much. Some people call it corporate image, others call it reputation, so there's not a big difference. But you will find literature that tells you both that it's the same and that it's very, very different. I think it's not so much about what one thing is defined as versus another. The more important thing is that we're aligned in regards to what we're talking about, and that is stakeholder perceptions and how they help you make better decisions in regards to how you communicate. And ultimately, just move the chat box here so I can see. Reputation is a means to an end. On the far left here, you have the different channels that you communicate with to your stakeholders. They then perform or create perceptions about your company on the 7 dimensions. It drives the feeling, ultimately drives support. And from that, you get the different things on the far right here, which is more market share, loyalty, profitability, lead generation, return on investment, and market value. That's the domino effect that we're trying to create. So if I were with you, I would ask you to have a conversation with me about which are the most important stakeholders for your organization. You can think about it just for 10 seconds now and just put them into the chat box for your organization. You don't need to write which organization you're from, just whichever stakeholders that come up. But that is the most important piece to begin with, is to figure out who are your key stakeholder groups and what do you want for them. I meet way too many companies that are doing a lot of research and spending a lot of money on doing research with stakeholders that aren't really important, or they don't really know why they're doing it. So make sure that you do that. I would also ask you to think about the different metrics that your organization uses. It needs to be the same metric across the different stakeholder groups and across different markets. Otherwise, your executive committee and your board are not able to compare apples to apples the reputation of the company. So you can't use one scorecard with one stakeholder group and then another scorecard with a third, and then another one with a fourth, etc. It needs to be one ring that rules them all, if you will, which you use to understand your reputation. And then ask yourselves, do you know exactly how they perceive you and what they expect from you? And is that built into the decision-making process of the company? Okay. On to some evidence now about why it matters, right? So one thing is me saying that it matters, which I just did. Another thing is me showing you that it matters. So first, reputation drives stakeholder choices. What you have here is all the different stakeholder supports on your left-hand side, and then you have the reputation score on the x-axis. So you have from poor all the way to strong or excellent. And so what it shows you is that the better you score on the center, the 4 questions I just showed you, the more support you'll get from your stakeholders. So you need to understand what exactly is it that drives these scores. And you do that only by doing research on the 7 dimensions and the 23 attributes that I showed you, that I showed you before, and integrate that into how you're communicating. But you can see how it exponentially drives more support the better the reputation. The stakes are high for reputation, risk and reward. So the downside is the cost of a poor reputation is that 9 out of 10 of your key stakeholders would not do those different things for you if you have a bad reputation. And if you have a good reputation, well, then that's where they would do all these things for you, right? So there is a correlation between reputation and stakeholder support. So organization, there's a question here in the chat, organization reputation versus employee personal brand. Why should we strike a balance? So the way I would say it is that employee, I guess you're talking about employer brand. So employer brand and the way in which the ambassadors of your company, your employees, view your company is obviously a part of your reputation, right? So that's one stakeholder group, your employees. You want them to love you, otherwise they can't talk positively about you, and people won't see, they reflect the organization for you. So they're just, as I see it, an important stakeholder, just as other stakeholders are important stakeholders as well. So here's just a quick piece of evidence that you can take to your CFO again. Now we're getting to some of the meaty slides, which has a little bit of finance in them. I think there are 3 of them where I just gave you some snippets that you can take to your CFO if they doubt about the worth of reputation. So what you see here is the proportion of intangibles of the market value of a company and how it's evolved in the past 50 years. So back in 1975, what it's basically telling you is that when you bought a Microsoft share in 75, 17% of the market, of the value of that share was book value, was intangible, sorry. The 17% was intangible, and the 83% was tangible, was the book value. Nowadays, on the far right here, and I'm clicking here because I can't see the far right of the slide, but on the far right here, you see that 84% in 2015, that's the proportion of intangible asset of the market value of a company on average on S&P 500. So what that basically means is that people are paying a lot of money for shares without really seeing on the book value, on the books of the company, why they would be paying it. They're paying it on the expectation that the company will render something for them in the future. So 83%, more than 84% is intangible asset, right? It's perception. You don't really know what it is, but it's an expectation of the future. So a big thing, a large value, if you take Saudi Aramco, for example, if you believe the 2 trillion that they believe to be worth, well, then 84% of the 2 trillion would be intangible asset. Obviously, they're an energy company, so they have a lot of tangible assets, but this is an average. But this is just to say it's super important to protect and to build, and this is an average globally across industries and in the US. So there's a question here from a university. So basically, it's the same process. So they're asking, how can we improve our reputation? We want to raise our universal ranking. And so I would say again, who exactly is it that you're trying to improve your reputation with? And then I would use that, and then I would measure what they expect from you if you don't already know it. And then I would try to address that through my communications with that particular audience. So identify who it is that you're looking to improve amongst, and then drive all your communications towards meeting those demands. In terms of improving on the rankings, that's a little more tricky because it depends on the ranking. Different rankings are made up by different things, and I don't know exactly which ranking you're referring to. But I would look at which ranking is it that I'm looking to improve on. How is it made up? Who are the stakeholders who are addressing it? What are the factors that they're addressing you on or rating you on? And then I would try to figure out whether on the ratings that you're rated on, how you're rated amongst your stakeholders, and then try to improve your communications on the things that you might not be doing so well on. So exactly the same as for a company, I would do it for a university as well. We work for many universities as well, by the way. Obviously, the scorecard would be a little different than the RepTrack scorecard I just showed you, because there are different things that matters for a university than the things that matter for an organization. So here's another way of showing it. So what we did here was we correlated the best reputed companies in the world and the worst reputed companies in the world with their stock exchange throughout the past many, many years. And so what you see here, fact, the most reputable companies totally outperform the financial market. So if you're looking to make money, basically look at the reputation ratings, go for the ones that have the best reputations, and then they will definitely be the ones that render most to you in the future. 2.5x better stock market performance for the RepTrak 10 companies, the 10 most reputable companies, as compared to the S&P 500 index since 2006. So they're making more money for you than the others are, and that's why it's important. And here you have a picture of Alberto Andreu. He's a leader in a company called Telefónica out of Spain. It's one of the largest telcos in the world. And basically what we did for them was we figured out what exactly is it that drives ARPU, which for them is revenue per user. And then you can see here what he said, which is that it explains the value of the company, and they were able to, through their communications, portray what it is they're doing as an organization and meet the expectations of the stakeholder. So financial performance and reputation are linked. You see that here as well. Reputable companies are able to better manage and recover from a crisis. So what you see here on the upper right-hand side, I don't know whether you can see my mouse when I do this, but what happens is that when a crisis hits, then most companies within the industry, they drop 5 to 8 points on percent points on the stock exchange. The ones that had a better reputation going into the crisis will recover much quicker. So when a CFO tells you, well, we already have a good reputation, why would we bother about that? Well, then it's about protecting your reputation for the bad times. And inshallah, that never happens. But nonetheless, it does happen for some organizations. You see some of them here. I brought some examples with me, Samsung, BP, Volkswagen, and Wells Fargo. And what we're trying to show here is that Samsung and Volkswagen going into their crises had a fairly good reputation, a score of 75 and a score of 78. So they recovered much quicker, and the loss was much smaller than the one of Wells Fargo and BP, who did not have a good reputation going into the crisis. And so their drop was much bigger, and they lost much more money proportionally than the two other companies did on the stock exchange. So there is a link between reputation and financial performance, both for the upside and the downside. So we did a study, as I was saying before. It's called the Global RepTrak Study. You can just Google it and you'll find some of the results. What we did was we measured the reputation of the 15 largest companies, the 100 largest companies in the world across the 15 largest economies. It's an online survey. We did it, as you see here, in December, Jan of this year. We asked about 70,000 people, and the eligibility in terms of getting into the ranking, the list, are the ones you see here. So I'm just giving you the background for the study before I show you the results. And what it's showing is that globally, what's going on at the moment is that trust in companies, or reputation in companies on average, is going up after COVID. So as you see here, the top 100 companies average is going up, whereas you might think actually that it would be going down in times of COVID. But fact is that companies have reacted better to it than not. And that has meant a 1.8 point increase in reputation, or a 2.5% year-over-year increase. So it's not a bad time for reputation. It's not that you would think that during a crisis like the COVID has been, that companies would necessarily lose reputation. Many companies have actually done fairly well. Here you see which industries. So different industries have different reputations. So here you have, I think, 13 different industries. Within them, obviously, there are a number of companies that we measured in the study. And so what you see is the ranking of industries. So consumer durables and apparel, fast-moving consumer goods, in other words, are doing best, whereas banks are not doing so well. So you need to know this as an organization as well. Which industry is it we're in, and who are we fighting against for what? As I was saying before, it's important with the stakeholders. If you're not talking about consumers, if you're talking about talent or investors, obviously you're competing with organizations from other industries, and so therefore it's important to see as well, how do I fare with other industries? But what it's showing you is that technology, hardware, and equipment has improved with 6 points during the crisis, And so obviously tech companies, not obviously, but it has happened, tech companies have massively improved their reputation during the crisis. And here you have the top 10, and I'm leading into showing you also the Saudi ranking. So bear with me as I just show you some of the global results. So these are the 10 best reputed companies in the world. So we measured them across 15 markets. And so this is the average of the score of the 15 markets. And so Lego, which happens to be a Danish company where I am right now, won the race, if you will, with a score of 80, which means that they're doing excellent across 15 markets, across their different stakeholder groups, Rolex, Ferrari, Bosch, etc. But what's interesting is that when you look at the different stakeholder groups, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and also the older side, the boomers, if you will, well, then there's a massive shift in who people like and who people don't like. So what's happening is that tech companies are very fastly improving their reputation and getting into the list. As you see here, if I just go back, you don't see any tech companies here at all, but as you see, they're coming, right? So in a few years' time, we'll see almost only tech companies probably on the top 10. So this is what a ranking looks like. This is what it would look like for you as well at the very, very high level. This is obviously just a beauty contest. It doesn't tell you what to do about it, but it's important to understand how you are positioned vis-a-vis your peers. And so this is the top 100. I'm not going to bore you with it. We're going to send it to you anyway, but it was just to show you the 100 most reputable companies and whether they went up or down on the list. So which company has the best reputation in KSA? Anybody dares writing something into the chat? This is old data though, so this is back 5 years ago. So which company would have had the best reputation in Saudi Arabia 5 years ago? Turkey, you saw the data, so you can't answer.
Exactly.
Let me see.
Well, there's a few answers.
Aramco, yeah. So Aramco and SABIC. Right, and so now I would ask you, well, why do you think that, right? If I was there and we would have an interactive session about it. But I mean, those are good choices. Any reasons you would give it? Why Aramco and SABIC? No one dares.
Sometimes it's blowing their own horn. They might be, you know.
That's right. So here we go, right? So this is the top 30. I have we measured 50 companies, and so what you see here is the RepTrack Pulse, which is the reputation score. And then so Turkey, can you see my mouse when I'm moving it? You can, okay. So this is the reputation score. And as you see, it's a ranking, so it goes all the way down. And again, this is just a beauty contest. So I just wanted to give you an understanding of how we measure the high level. We didn't get to the what do I do about it yet, but I'll get to it in just a moment. And then you have the level of familiarity as well. So 83.8, Jarir Bookstore 93.9, Toshiba 92, Sony 82, etc. And then you have their scores. And this is also telling you that being very big doesn't necessarily mean being beautiful. Right? So it's not only about building familiarity, it's also about saying the right things and building familiarity. But it's not just about building familiarity. So it's not about just getting the message out there, getting reach. You also need to get impact. And in order to get impact, you need to understand what your stakeholders expect from you.
Nicolas, if you allow me, because we have received an answers about why SABIC and Aramco. One answer is the most successful, and the other one is the biggest company in the world, and good insurance, for example. Does these numbers on this matrix or this slide represent the audience opinion of SABIC and Aramco? I think we might elaborate more to deliver the idea.
Sure. So what we did was an online survey, and again, this is old data, right? 5 years old. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, just to visualize what I'm talking about when I talk about reputation. So this is an online sample in Saudi Arabia. So this is the online general public of Saudi Arabia 5 years ago. All right. So is it the audiences of Aramco? No, not necessarily, because they are also, you know, we do regulators for them around the world. And so this is just KSA. And people love Aramco and KSA, and they love SABIC as well. And so it's as important for them to understand what their reputation is outside of KSA. But this is KSA only. And so only the general public in Saudi Arabia saying what they think about the largest companies in Saudi Arabia. And so obviously what it tells you is that they are scoring very, very well on the 4 items that I showed you in the beginning of my presentation. So admiration and respect, trust, good feeling, overall esteem. Those 4 questions we asked the general public of Saudi Arabia about all these companies, and then we created an average from it, and that gives you a 0 to 100 score. We also asked them, to what extent do you know Apple? To what extent do you know Jarir Bookstore? Because you need to be able to have a certain amount of familiarity with the company in order to be able to rate them. So you're not allowed to rate a company unless you know them. So as you see here, they're very well-known companies, right? 83, 77, 99, 82. So a lot of people know them in Saudi Arabia. And then we went on to ask the questions about reputation. And that's where these scores come out. And so we do that for all countries, just as a high-level understanding of, so who's the best practice? So apparently the best practice in Saudi Arabia right now, or 5 years ago, sorry, are these Apple, Jarir, Toshiba, Sony, Nestle, Saudi Aramco. These are great scores. Anything in the 70s would be a great score. Once you get into the 60s, you start having trouble. And that's where I'm saying, so we would work with these companies. We work with some of them already in order to understand what's my positioning, why are they thinking the way they do? And that takes you to the 7 dimensions. Which of those am I not doing so well on? Which of the 23 attributes am I not doing so well on? And which of them are important? So the ones that are important, and this gets us to actionability. So what you need to do in order to improve. You need to improve on the things where you're not doing so well that are important for your audiences. And I'll get to that here in just a moment.
So, again, getting back to SABIC and Aramco, and we use them as an example because, you know, audience have already commented on them. So we use as an example that when you are looking at reputation, we're going back to one of the steps that you use, is that you should have a holistic view, okay? Because if you look at the chat box, you will see the reasons is good insurance, high salary. So they are looking at it from one angle or one angle, which is the benefits. But you in measuring the reputation, from what we have understood right now, is that you should have a holistic point of view and holistic measurement tools.
That's right.
And yes, and evident to that is Apple, Jarir, Toshiba, Sony, Nestle came before those 2 companies.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and messaging is one thing, right? Saying the right things to the audiences is one thing. Another thing is doing it through the right channels and doing it through the right activities. So take Aramco, for example. They use 20 different channels to communicate with, but they don't know which of them are the ones that are giving them the biggest bang for the buck. Is it our website, or is it Instagram, or is it Facebook, or is it Facebook in Arabic, or is it Facebook in English and across different markets and so forth, on the one aspect. And on the other aspect, they also spend a lot of money on social activities, and so does SABIC. And so they want to understand which of those activities is it that people want me to invest behind. And unless they know that, it's going to be very difficult to make people happy. So they want to make, obviously the KSA general public are very important for both SABIC and for Aramco. And so therefore, they study what you think and what you expect. And then they feed that into the decision-making process. So they try to adapt the organization to what you want them to be. They adapt the channels in order to get to the audiences through the channels that are giving them the biggest bang for the buck. And they obviously only invest behind social activities and other sponsorships and so forth that are giving them ambassadors of the company. And that's what reputation research and insights should be doing for all the organizations listening in today. If you're doing research on your reputation or your brand, those are the things that the research should be telling you. And if not, your suppliers are not doing their job. I hope that answered, Turkey, your question. And so here you have some of the ones that aren't doing so well. So so Saudi telecom company is not doing super well. And you might say, well, all telecom companies don't do very well. Well, in fact, when you look at the industry that I showed you before, if you double click on the industry, you have maybe 100 companies within that industry that we measure on a global scale. Some of them actually do very, very well, just like Aramco. But some don't, right? If they have a monopoly and they don't feel necessarily they need to do what they need to do in order to make people happy, then these things happen, right? Where they get a 50, which basically means that people are answering 3 on a 7-point scale as to whether they like them or not, which is not so good. It means that they don't trust the company, they don't admire and respect, and so forth. So this is a place where you don't want to be. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay. But so we measure familiarity and we measure reputation to understand, well, how familiar are the audiences with our company on the one hand, and then once we know how many are familiar, well, the ones that are familiar, how well do they like us? And that's what you're looking at right here.
Excuse me, Nicolas, if you allowed me. Why these statistics, they are 5 years ago? Why we don't have a new statistic regarding to the Saudi market from your institute?
That's because we did this 5 years ago out of our own pocket, and no one has asked us to do it since then. And so I thought for this particular presentation, it would be interesting for you all to see, but I would be happy to update it if someone would fund it, but we just haven't done it. But we could easily do it. It may be unfair to compare the reputation and familiarity of companies. So there's a question in the chat in terms of the fairness of comparing and benchmarking familiarity of companies which deal only with industrial markets customers with those who sell products to the general public. On one extent, yes. On another extent, when you're looking at things holistically, then companies compete for other things than just product. And so people also compete for best talent and for investors and for media to write about them. And for that, everybody's competing with everyone. But you're right, in terms of the products, if you're only looking at products and services of a company, then yes, but that's where you need to look more holistically. There are many stakeholders that people are fighting with. And so that's why it's interesting to also see it in this particular way. They're all fighting for attention from the general public. All of these companies are fighting for attention from the general public in Saudi Arabia. Also Aramco and SABIC are industrial companies, and they're fighting for attention from the general public as well. And again, and this might not be a stakeholder that's interesting for all these companies, right? So as all of these 50 companies go through the exercise of identifying the most important stakeholder groups, they might find that the general public of Saudi Arabia is not important, in which case, forget about this, right? And don't worry about it. Just worry about the stakeholders that matter for your business. So I'm not saying that this is super important for everyone necessarily. I'm just showing it to get the conceptual understanding of what we're talking about.
On that note, Nicolas, do you think that they are fighting for the attention and reputation for the Saudi general public for another reasons, maybe to attract best talents, to be members of the employees and the company, to attract talents and new employees? Don't you think that might be a reason?
Definitely. I mean, take the US, for example. I mean, if we take the US, Saudi Aramco and SABIC are fighting to get the best talent away from Google and Apple and other types of companies. The same goes for investments. Saudi Aramco are out there fighting to get people to invest in Saudi Aramco instead of Apple and Microsoft and what have you. So there's a lot of fighting going on with different stakeholder groups, and you just need to figure out what you're fighting, what your arena is, right? Is it what I just said, or is it something else? Are you fighting for investment, or are you fighting for talent, or are you fighting for support in the general public, or what is it you're fighting for? And then focus in on that and do the research focused on that. In this particular case, yeah, go ahead, Turki.
What you're saying is to build a holistic, positive reputation, you need to focus on the areas that you need to have a good reputation in. And by the end of the day, joining that, all of that efforts into one process and getting out with the best outcomes. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So I'll get back to the process again in just a moment. But you're absolutely right, Turki. But so this is the beauty contest, and then we get on to what is the most important dimension in Saudi Arabia. Right. So what were the drivers of reputation back in 2017 or 16 when we did this particular study? Was it performance, or are Saudis more interested in innovation? Or so I can tell you that when international companies are coming to Saudi and fighting for consumers in Saudi Arabia, they look at this in order to understand what should I be communicating through which channels in order to get reputation, in order to get support, so that you guys buy their product instead of some other product, right? So Samsung, for example, they're fighting to get you to buy their TVs instead of the others' TVs. And it's not just about the television anymore, it's about all the other things as well. And so here are the results from back then, and I would get you to focus on the right-hand side of the slide, which tells you which are the most important drivers of reputation in Saudi Arabia back 5-6 years ago. And what it's telling you, interestingly enough, is that performance, leadership, and citizenship are the most important ones, whereas these aren't as important. So these are the company behind the product are more important than product and innovation when it comes to correlating whether they trust a company and how they're perceiving and whether they would support them. I see a question more here. Does media build reputation? Definitely. So media is one channel, right? So either you use media as a direct marketing tool, or you use media as an indirect marketing tool through PR. In whichever case, whatever I read about a certain company obviously builds my perceptions about the company. So it's a very important tool to drive reputation. One thing is my direct experiences with a company. Another thing is what I read about the company. So definitely very, very important channel. I would call that a channel. But it's important to dissect media into all the different media channels, right? So certain things might be working for you, others might be working against you. Website, LinkedIn, Facebook, different languages, etc. But interestingly, and the question would be, if I was there with you discussing whether these things have changed since 2016, as in, are there other things that are more important today than it was the case back then? But these are the most important drivers of reputation back then. Today, this is back to the global study. Today, I can tell you that in terms of driving benefit of the doubt, driving trust, ESG is the most important driver. That is super interesting. ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. So those things are going to drive whether people give you the benefit of the doubt and trust you more so than some of the other things, your brand and product and workplace and leadership. Product still drives buying behavior. Brand drives recommendation behavior. But to drive trust and benefit of the doubt, you need to build your ESG profile. So we built these steps, these 5 steps, just for you to, and again, we'll share this with you. But this is just for you to understand where you would be. You can identify where you exactly are on a reputation journey. So are you doing professional stakeholder management, as in reputation management, or not? And so on the far left is where you begin the journey, right? It's where you're exploring, what's my reputation? Can you measure reputation? So you're doing a study, you're not really using it for anything other than just to understand positioning. Next comes discovery. So you're starting to look at what drives behavior. So what are the drivers of reputation? How does my reputation compare to my benchmarks? And how does it compare to the industry? Next is, how do you activate the value of your reputation? So now you're starting to look at, so which are the different things I need to do in order to improve reputation? You're integrating it into the decision-making process of the company. Super difficult to do because people will be, yeah, I don't really care about that. I think this is going to work. But again, you can't manage what you don't know. So I would definitely urge you to use the data to drive planning. How can you obtain 360 view of your reputation to evaluate opportunities and risks? So this is where you start adding in the element of reputation risk. Reputation risk has to do with the events that, if they happen, they would have a negative impact on the reputation of your company. You need to establish that. Which are those events that, if they happened, they would have a negative impact on your reputation? And then you need to establish impact, estimated impact, and likelihood. Right, so what do you think the impact on my reputation is going to be if it happened, and how likely is it that it'll happen? That's a super important PR comms tool to use when trying to prevent something from happening. So if you have 15 or 20, Saudi Aramco has 1,000 different risks, there's a reputation component to all of them. And so they're asking themselves continuously, which are the events that, if they happen, they would have a negative impact? What would the impact be on my reputation, on that score? And what is the likelihood that it'll happen? If there's a high likelihood and high impact, obviously you need to focus in on that. Low likelihood, high impact, you don't need to do much about it right now, but you need to start worrying about it. Low impact, high likelihood, doesn't really matter as much because it won't impact the reputation of the company. We had an interesting example with Johnson & Johnson in regards to reputation risk management, where the logo of Johnson & Johnson was being used by the Red Cross in the US. And suddenly they entered into a partnership with Pfizer, which is a big competitor of Johnson & Johnson. And the lawyers went to Johnson & Johnson and said, you need to sue Red Cross, otherwise you'll lose the rights to the logo. And obviously Johnson & Johnson hesitated, as you would rather not want to sue the Red Cross. So they did a piece of reputation risk research to understand what would the impact be if we sued Red Cross. So high likelihood that we'll sue them. What would the impact be? With our key stakeholder groups, they found that the impact wasn't so big. They sued them, they won, and no impact actually happened. So you can predict these things. And then finally, how can you embed reputation? This is step 5. This is really where you get into where a Saudi Aramco is. You start embedding reputation into the company strategy and execution. You make people accountable for the reputation of the company, and you can only make them accountable if you start building key performance indicators around it. Very text-heavy slide, this one, but I wanted to be sure that I showed it to you because it really takes you through the 8 things that your reputation research should be giving you. Right, so this is the toolbox that Turkey was asking for before. This is it. All right, so these are the things that you need to do. You need to define and monitor reputational performance with your key stakeholder groups. Right, so you need to understand what you're up against before you start communicating. If you don't know what you're communicating with, then it's very difficult. For example, here for this particular audience today, I had a long session with Turkey to understand who exactly am I speaking with, what would they find important in order to be able to meet your expectations for the presentation here today. The same goes for an organization. They need to understand who they're up against and what the expectations are going to be. Once you have the analysis, and here this is a 2x2 that talks about how well am I performing versus the things that are important or not. So very important, not doing so well are the things you want to improve on. So you need to prioritize the relevant contents to integrate into the company storytelling. So when you're doing PR, you need to do PR on the things that matter. If you're pushing topics that don't matter for the audience you're speaking with, it's not going to have any impact, and you're wasting the company's money. You need to understand reach and impact of all the different channels that you use, whether it's the Facebook again or whatever channels you use to communicate with the audiences. I'm pretty sure you use 10, 15, 20 different channels to communicate with your audience, and then comes different languages, maybe if you're international. So you need to understand impact and reach of your channels. You obviously need to define company positioning based on that. You need to draw up an action plan to optimize reputation activities. And by that, I mean, if you're doing different, so take a university, for example. There was a university before. They're doing different things that they're investing in regards to marketing and branding. Which of those things are the ones that are giving you the biggest bang for the buck? Right, so what is the transaction cost per net ambassador that I'm getting out of any given activity that I'm spending $100,000 on? You need to understand that. Otherwise, you might be investing behind something that isn't giving you anything at all. And you need to isolate it to that particular activity. And so again, reach, impact of channels, reach, impact of activities. All of this comes out of a small piece of reputation research. It doesn't take a lot. It might look very complex, but it's not. What's my reputation? What do I need to focus on? This is what's my reputation. What do I need to focus on in order to meet the expectations? And how well am I performing on the things that matter? What about the channels? Have I adjusted my positioning to what people expect? What are the different activities that are giving me the biggest bang for the buck? Evaluate the ROI of main activities and reputation, right? Which are the ones that are giving me ambassadors? Analyze earned media, reputation impact. So this is, you all do media monitoring, I'm sure. Otherwise, you should. Fairly inexpensive exercise to understand who's writing about me and are they writing positive or negative. Integrate that into the analysis. Integrate reputation metrics with business KPIs. So this is a more difficult one, is to convince the CEO that they need to add reputation to the balance scorecard. But I can tell you that the largest organizations in the world do that today. Companies like UBS, for example, the bank, 10% of the company's CEO bonus is driven by reputation metrics to ensure that he's making decisions that are holistic and not just for the short-term gains of the shareholder. It's all about stakeholder, less about shareholder today.
Nicolas?
Yeah.
We have like 10 minutes before we enter the Q&A session. So if you need more time, just please tell me.
No, I think 10 minutes. I think I have like 3-4 slides and then we're done.
Excellent. We have like 10 questions at the chat box, and we have also raised hand that I think they're going to raise question also. So awesome. Please.
Perfect. So integrate reputational metrics with business KPIs, just an important piece where you make people accountable. Again, if you don't make them accountable, it's never going to move anything. And so this is one of the things that Sabig and Saudi Aramco are working on to ensure that people are accountable, otherwise it won't have an effect. Make sure you track KPIs on an ongoing basis. Reputation is not a one-off, so it's not one piece of research and then you stop. You need to track it on an ongoing basis. So instead of spending all the money one time, just make sure that it's an investment over time. You need to integrate it into the budget of your company to track impact over time of the different things that you're doing to make sure that it impacts. And finally, if you get this far, the idea is to do what I just went through in terms of reputation risks, which is identify the most important events that if they happened, they would have a negative impact on the reputation of the company. It could be environmental disaster, or I'm pretty sure a university, again, just to go back to that, would have a lot of different things that if they happened, it would be bad. Those things you need to identify and you need to talk about or measure the potential impact and likelihood that it'll happen, and then focus your resources on the things that have high likelihood and high impact, potentially. So these are 10 very important things, relatively straightforward to do. They look very complex on this slide, I realize that, but they're actually not super complex. That's a quick question here before I move on. So we'll take this in the Q&A. All right, I'm just going to dive into a few of these just as an example, Turkey, and then we'll end it. So I took 3-4 slides just to dive into these different elements. So as you see here on the upper right, you see this is an example of the reputation of a company. So this is Ferrero. It's back from 2017. We obviously can't show you the updated results of Ferrero, but what they want to understand is how do I compare country by country across 15 different markets. And so we measure their reputation in 15 different markets in order for them to understand where they need to focus in. And so South Korea and China, they're not doing so well. In Germany and Italy, they're doing very, very well. So that's important for the CEO of Ferrero to understand how to manage their reputation. Obviously, the results here would go to the German CEO, and so we would send the German report to Ferrero in Germany, and then he would have to do something about it there, and he would go through the 10 steps in each country. Then we look at, and so this is still within measurement, right? Getting the insight on what's going on. This is how they perform. This is really Ferrero across 50 markets. This is the importance. You see, it's very different from the general across industries drivers of Saudi Arabia, which I showed you just a minute ago. Here, the most important thing is the product, is the chocolate across all markets. And then it's ethics, making sure that they don't tamper with the product, obviously, and then making sure that the company is performing well. One more element that Ferrero would be looking at in regards to insights is the uncertainty that people have of things that they might be doing. So I can tell you that Ferrero are doing a lot of things on both citizenship down here and governance, and you see 56.5% on governance, 59.6% on citizenship. What that means is that people are uncertain about what Ferrero actually does on those things. So I would hope that Ferrero's positioning is not citizenship, because there are so many people who don't know anything about their citizenship profile. Again, this is the general public, so Ferrero might be focusing on subsegments of the general public rather than a representative sample of the general public. I hope that makes sense to you. I mean, the whole thing about stakeholders is super important, right? So for Ferrero here, this is the general public, it's everyone. It's from age 15 to 75, whereas Ferrero, when they communicate, they might be focused in on just mothers, maybe, right? Mothers who buy chocolate for their families when they're in the supermarket, maybe. And if that's the case, then obviously this would change the picture for Ferrero. So this is just an example of what the data would look like. And then here's the channel performance to define highest impact, the return on investment of the media mix approach. So as you see here, this is reach. If you can see my mouse on the x-axis, and up here you have reputation impact. And so owned media has a very high impact. Owned media would be website and your Facebook channel and whatever, whereas earned media is PR, right? So PR has a very high reach. Someone was asking before whether media has an impact on reputation. Absolutely. A lot of people here, 64% have heard about Ferrero in media, in the different media channels, and it's driving 6.1 points difference in reputation. So whenever someone sees something in earned media, they're scoring the company 6.1 points higher than the people who haven't seen it. And when people have a direct experience with the chocolate, 77% of the audience across 15 markets, so this is hundreds of thousands of people, have eaten the chocolate. When they have done that, they score Ferrero much higher, right? So you need to dissect these things: owned media, paid media, earned media, direct experience, in order to understand where am I reaching my audience and is it impacting? And then on the right-hand side is just talking about the fact that Ferrero would benefit from a multi-channel approach. So not just focusing all money in one channel, but multi-channel approach gives them much more bang for the buck in India, China, and South Korea, which this is an example of, than only focusing on one channel. Again, a text-heavy slide here, but it's important, right? So here you have, up here you have different activities. So think about an activity that you're investing behind. You've invested $50,000 or $1 million, whichever it might be. But you don't really know whether it's giving you the bang for the buck with the audience that you're hoping that it had an impact on. So first is, here you have activity X. There are people who are aware of it, and I know it's very late in the day and we're all tired, but this one is important to show. What it's showing is that people who are aware of the product are scoring the company way higher, 15.9 points higher than people who have never seen the activity before. So it's about pushing reach in order to make people like you, right? So would people recommend the company more by looking at this activity? Absolutely. 83.7% would recommend the company if they've seen this activity, whereas if you haven't seen the activity, you would only give it 50. So huge difference for this particular company, for this particular activity, in terms of getting people to see it. So that's what you need to do with all your activities, and then look at your activities one versus the other. So take Aramco, for example. They have a lot of activities that they invest in SABIC, in Saudi Arabia. And so they want to see which of those activities that they're pouring millions and millions of dollars into in Saudi Arabia, which of those are the ones that are actually impacting the reputation of the company, in which case it would be because they're doing what people expect. I don't think so this one is important on the activities. So whatever activities you're investing behind, make sure you do research to understand impact. Here's just to show you correlation with churn, ARPU, and first activations, right? So reputation does correlate with things that matter for a business. This is what a CFO would like. He would like to see that there is a direct correlation between reputation and the things that you all do in media and PR and comms and branding and marketing, the things that you do, and actual business KPIs.
I believe that this is a very important slide, and you can take your time. We can take like 5 to 10 minutes from the Q&A segment, because I believe everyone here, really needs this to convince, their financial departments and their CFO.
Right. So basically, these are statistical analyses done on the back of hundreds of thousands of data points that we've gathered across the 15 markets that I just showed you, right? So we measure 100 companies in 15 markets, 100,000 people ratings, and I think it was 70,000 people have answered questions on this. So the validity of what I'm showing you is super high. And you will want to, so if you're showing this to anyone else, you will want to show that to them and tell them that this is based on the answers of a lot of people. And so what it's showing you is that there's a correlation, which is 0.63, which is a fairly high correlation between reputation on the x-axis and churn, like losing clients. So you don't lose clients the better reputation you have. It's basically what it's saying. Same goes with annual revenue per user, right? So how much money we spend with a telco, for example, per year is something they measure. And it's very important for any given company that revenue goes up. So we spend more money with a TV company, with Apple, with Netflix, and whatever have you, all the things that we subscribe to. So ARPU is a super important business metric. And so what it's telling you is that there's a very strong correlation between annual revenue per user and how people perceive you, so reputation. So it's just a scientific proof that there's a high correlation. And then the last one here, I'm just going to move the screens. I have screens here, so I can't see what it says. Between reputation and first activation. So reputation shows a good relationship with net growth. Further modeling will show impact. So here you see the correlation between reputation on the x-axis, and this is showing correlation whether you have a good reputation or not. So this is all the data points compared with churn and ARPU. And that's where you see the high correlation. And by correlation, I mean, it would be 1, if it's raining outside and you have an umbrella, you would open the umbrella. That's a correlation of 1, right? Pretty sure that people would open their umbrella if they had one if it's raining. So a 0.5 is a fairly high correlation in statistics. And then here, I think it's an important point to make, Turkey, just to, I have 2 more slides only, which is the tracking aspect. So in the, 10 years ago, companies were doing reputation as a project. So it's something you do one-off and then you don't do it anymore because you don't need to do the research. I would much rather that you spent the money, instead of spending $1,000 in one time, I'd rather have you spending $100 per month throughout 12 months. Not with me, but with whomever you're using as a supplier. So spread the investment out throughout the year in order to see what the impact is of the things that you're doing. Otherwise, you can't see impact. If you're doing it in January this year, and then January again next year, you don't know exactly what the impact was of the things that you did, because people will have forgotten whatever you did. So you need to, reputation, you need to track. It's an ongoing thing. It's not a one-off. And that's what this is showing you. It's showing you an ongoing metric to show a reputation trend. And just to go back to the first slide I showed you, which is really the big takeaway, and I know it's fairly simple, but it's super complex to do, obviously, once you get into it, but not that complex. Once you have the slides, just go through it, and I'm very happy to answer emails on the topic, and if you need it, and I'll again send everything to Turkey so he can circulate. But the thing about stakeholders is important. The data I showed you was on the general public. Figure out, I'm sorry, figure out who your stakeholders are and define it very specifically. Because also, even within your organization, across the different functions in your organization, you will find that the understanding of any given stakeholder will be different. So make sure you've written that down. Who is the stakeholder that is important for our business? And then make sure that your PR and comms efforts are dedicated towards them only. And if you're looking to improve on a ranking, if that's the measure of success, the university, for example, the measure of success for them was a ranking. So they want to rank high on the international rankings. Well, you need to find out what the criteria are for those rankings in order to figure out, how to impact the ranking. Same goes for my ranking. I just showed you a ranking of KSA among the general public. If the success factor is to improve on that ranking, well, then obviously you need to focus on the general public of KSA because they're the ones rating in that particular ranking. Different rankings have different rating systems. You need to figure out what lies behind the ranking. Use objective holistic scorecard. So NPS and things like that don't work. You need to understand 360 what people are perceiving you as. Otherwise, you might miss out on something that is important when you are measuring your reputation. And then it's not about the measurement, it's about integrating it into the decision-making process. If you don't integrate the research into the decision-making process, and so if you don't plan according to the insights from the research, don't do the research. Don't spend the money. So unless you plan to change what you're saying in accordance, adjust your channel mix, adjust your activities. Obviously, there are some activities that might be a pet project for a CEO, and then you don't do anything about it. For example, we work with Emirates Airlines. They sponsor a lot of football clubs around the world. Some of those football clubs give them some impact, others give them much more. But they're not going to kill this particular sponsorship because the CEO likes the club. And so there are CEO pet projects, if you will, which obviously you can't do anything about, but it's always good to show them the data that tells them whether it's impacting or not. And then the accountability, I think, is important because people won't worry about it unless they are accountable for it. And hopefully, the idea would be that you can integrate it into the objectives of any given person in an organization, and then ultimately track progress instead of doing it as a one-off project. I think, Turkey, that was all for today. I hope that was helpful in some way, shape, or form. I tried to live up to what you asked me to do. as any good organization and person would do, Turkey, studied my stakeholder and what the expectations were. But maybe there's a mismatch between what I did and what people expected, in which case I hope to be able to close that gap in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes when people ask questions and I answer them.
Well, I'm sure that we can all agree that that was a very informative and positive session. And we're really glad that you have accepted our invitation and have shed the light about the importance of reputation. I really understand that you said that reputation, and you know, all in all, it's not the end result, but it's the way to get there. But in our line of work, in public relation and communication, it is the end result in our line of work. So yeah. I do believe that it's a well spent extra 8 minutes to learn how to convince CFOs about the return of investment on reputation. Now, if you allow me, we'll move to the Q&A segment. We'll start with reading the already asked question in the chat box. I believe that you have answered 2 questions in the Q&A. But let's start with the questions. Then we'll move to discussion with the audience and allow them to ask you directly about what they are interested in. Okay, so the first question is, how does reputation differ from corporate image? What is the difference between reputation and corporate image? If we can, go through it quickly, so we can manage to answer all of the 10 questions, then go to the communication part.
Sure. So frankly, I don't think that, my personal opinion is that there's no big difference between corporate image and corporate reputation. Some might say that, well, some literature says that image is more visualizations that people have of a company rather than actual factors like the ones I showed you. But in my opinion, they could be side by side easily. And again, I don't think necessarily that the definitions are that important. What's important is that we agree when we talk about it, what we're talking about.
Thank you very much. I hope that Mr. Nicolas have answered your question. And this is another question. It states that our colleague is a corporate communication expert, employee at one of the educational institutes that has more than 100,000 students and faculty members. And the reputation of the institute is not so good. He said that they can twist facts and they can to enhance the reputation throughout some of their daily tasks through media and communication, but he feels that the responsibility of creating the reputation is to enhance their product as an institute, plus the performance of their employees. How can the corporate communication division enhance the reputation of the institute through enhancing the quality of the performance inside the institute? Okay, and he mentioned that the problem is sometimes when they send report or share reports to some of their internal stakeholders, the feedback is that you are trying to show us in a bad fashion, or you're trying basically to damage our reputation. It's a long question, but I hope that you understood it.
So what would you summarize it as, Turkey, that question?
Yeah. Well, he's asking how can they, as a corporate communication division, can enhance the reputation of a not so well
Reputed.
quality, an institute with basically bad outcomes? How can they enhance their reputation?
Well, first, I mean, I would establish whether it's the truth, right? So if you know, there's perception and there's reality. If the perception is that the quality is bad, but the reality is that it's good, then it's definitely a communications exercise to find all the proof points why the quality is good. I mean, we do find cases though where reality is bad. And perception is bad, and then you need to prove quality first, and then you can communicate about it. So I think it's about making sure that reality supports what you're trying to claim. And if it's the case, so let's assume it's the case, right? They have a good reality and the quality is great, but people don't see them as being great. Then I would do the same as I do with organizations, which is to find all the proof points, as in cases that would suggest that the university actually does produce good quality. And then I would communicate that through the channels that matter to the people that matter. I mean, that's what I would do. Does that make sense?
Actually, it makes all the sense, and appreciate that you're breaking it up and explain it that way, and I'm sure this answer will satisfy our colleague. There's another comment, and it says it may be unfair to compare the reputation and familiarity of companies which deal only with industrial markets customers with those who sell product or the general public.
Yeah, and I would say yes and no, right? On the one hand, we're trying to disseminate knowledge about corporate reputation. So in that sense, it's fair because we're all fighting for the same space out there, mind space of people. And as I was saying, you know, companies in certain markets compete for different things than just product. However, if you're looking at the same, if you're competing for product or for consumers, then definitely you wouldn't compare Aramco with the bookstore, or Apple or Toshiba or anything like that. You know, you would do Apple, Toshiba, Samsung, etc. in one bucket, and you would do some other companies in another bucket. Take Emirates, for example. Emirates wants to be a lifestyle brand. They don't want to sell travel. They want to sell a lifestyle. And so they feel they compete with any given company that has a good reputation in any of the markets that they operate in. So in Germany, that might be, you know, certain B2B companies who have a high, you know, esteem as lifestyle in Germany, but don't have anything to do with travel. So, I mean, you know, in some instances, yes, in other instances, no. I think what's important here is, again, to go back to what I've been saying throughout my presentation, which is figure out what your playing field is and then win the war there.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I cannot go through all of the questions because we need to open the door for verbal questions and interaction. So Abu Muhammad, if you can be kind enough, let's start with our first guest, Mr. عبد الرحمن بن حمود العناد القاضب، أستاذ الإعلام، مستشار نائب رئيس الجمعية السعودية للإعلام والاتصال، وعضو مجلس الشورى سابقاً، المشرف على البحوث والدراسات في مركز أسبار للدراسات والبحوث والإعلام. حياك الله أستاذ عبد الرحمن. أبو محمد يفتح المجال.
أوكي، بس لو يرفع يده عشان يطلع لي بس.
سم. أستاذ عبد الرحمن لو ترفع يدك كرما.
الأستاذ الدكتور عبد الرحمن العناد نتشرف فيه معنا اليوم، فودنا يشاركنا في المشاركة.
I get it. Okay. No. He's on the board now. Okay.
الأستاذ الدكتور عبد الرحمن العناد هو بروفيسور الاتصال والإعلام والعلاقات العامة، وهو شخصية علم من نفتخر أنه يكون معنا اليوم في الجمعية.
ونعم. الدكتور جاهز؟
يس. الو، السلام عليكم.
السلام، حياك الله دكتور.
Good evening everybody. Thank you for asking me to comment, and actually thank you for Mr. Trad. I have enjoyed the presentation very much, and it is very informative and useful for me and for all people who are interested in public relations and corporate images and corporate reputations. I actually, the main questions I had, I put them in the chat, and Mr. Trad answered them. And I don't have anything to say, but thank you also for inviting me to comment. And I would like to ask Mr. Trad just a personal question. Is your family name Trad an Arabic name? Thank you.
It is. I'm Lebanese, so it's a Lebanese name.
Okay. Nice meeting you.
It's a real pleasure and a real honor for me to be able to present to you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
There was a question about country reputation, if you want me to answer it.
Please.
Sure.
Do
so. I think the question was the dimensions that we use to measure the reputation of a country. And so we do that a lot, actually, also for Saudi Arabia. And so the three factors we use are, it's the same principle, right? So it's a round model, and it has advanced economy, appealing environment, and effective government. And all of those things drive whether you want to live in, work in, buy products from companies that come from, you want to go study, you want to visit, you want to invest in a country, or attend an event organized in the country. So obviously a country is trying to drive other things than a company. But as I said, appealing environment is one dimension, effective government is another dimension, and advanced economy is the third dimension. And we actually just came out of field doing a global piece of research among the G8 general public, and we're publishing that in a month's time. But happy to share materials as well to whomever would want that, but it's not part of this presentation, which was more focused on organizations. There was another question about proponents. What about if we change the word stakeholder by proponent? Definitely. I mean, I think that's a good point. I think proponent, though, is an advocate of something, as opposed to a stakeholder who can also be negative, right? So they can not advocate, they can be negative about your company. And so we need to look at both the people who are advocates of the brand, but also people who are not advocates of the brand, in order to understand how can we move these people over to become advocates. That was my point of view on that one. Who is the responsible for the company's image and reputation? Another great question. I would ask you all to answer that first, though, if I was with you. I'm not, though, but it's everyone in the organization. So there needs to be a culture of understanding that whatever you do as a person can impact the reputation of the company. It can be one person that could destroy the reputation of a company by doing the wrong thing. So remember that all the employees are representatives of the brand, and I think what's important there is to inform employees about that. I don't think they always know that they have a lot of power when they do and say what they do. I think PR and CorpCom departments are more of a mediator and are responsible for ensuring that the company understands the impact of reputation and what the reputation of the company is, but they're not responsible for building and growing it necessarily. Only that needs to be a cross-functional discipline. So when we build reputation committees in companies, we have representatives of all the different functions in the company: legal, accountability, the business, the actual business, if you will, not just corporate. And we obviously have corp comms, marketing, HR in there as well. So all the representatives of the different stakeholders of the company. I wrote my email in there because people were asking me for it.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. I believe there's a Miss Rana. She raised her hand.
Super.
Miss Rana. أبو محمد، هل الأستاذة رنا موجودة معنا الآن؟
Yeah, she is on the she's on the stage. She can talk now. Unmute and talk.
سام؟
Yeah, على الستيج الآن إذا ودها تتكلم.
تفضل أستاذة رنا.
أيوة أنا معاكم.
تفضلي يا أستاذة رنا، عندك سؤال؟
لا، في الحقيقة أنا متابعاكم بس ما عندي سؤال.
يعطيك العافية، شفنا بس رافعة يدك.
Okay,
I believe.
Okay.
Also, I believe that we have skipped few questions.
سمحت لي في سؤال. I have a question here, if you allowed me, Turkey, for Mr. Nicolas.
تفضل.
You know, we heard last week the crisis happened to Tesla company, which is the electric car company, that there is an accident happened for them, for one of their cars. And immediately affect this one, the news took this accident and immediately affect the share market for Tesla company. How you think they can manage these, their reputation in this accident?
Well, once the accident has happened, it's more crisis management than it's reputation management. Obviously, what I would have told Tesla is to ensure that they have built the reputation cushion that I was talking about before the crisis hit, which I think they've done. I think they've built a very strong reputation among their stakeholders around the world, which is why the impact on their share is not going to be long-lasting. But obviously right now, the way we've worked with Tesla is to ensure that they're ready should the event happen, which it did. And obviously the likelihood was high. It was one of the events and the impact was relatively high on the reputation of Tesla. But given that they come into the crisis with a very strong reputation, they are recovering very, very quickly from the crisis. Same goes for I showed 4 examples before: BP, Samsung, Wells Fargo. I forget the last one, but some of those have been able to build a strong reputation going into the crisis, and some of them have not. And so the ones that didn't fell much further and lost much more money than the ones that had a strong reputation going into the crisis. So once the crisis hits, it's a whole other discipline. It's crisis management more than its reputation management.
Thank you very much. Abu Muhammad, is there anyone else?
I mean, there was this question about, is it true that companies sell their reputations and without that they'll fall down? And I think, if I understand the question right, I think everything you do has an impact on the reputation of your organization. And that's what I was trying to get at before. Whether it's a direct experience that I have, for example, Itisal, now I have a direct experience. I had heard about you before, so you had a reputation. I had a perception about the organization. Now I'm experiencing the great questions that I'm getting and the professional approach to this webinar, and so obviously my reputation is very, very high. So is it true companies sell their, I don't know if they're selling their reputation, but they're certainly impacting it with whatever they do. And they can't be without it. So you have it, and it's up to you to do something about it. You cannot not have it, just as you cannot not communicate. So you cannot not have a reputation with the people who know you, because they will perceive something about you, and they will either support you or not. So that's my point of view on that. And then there was an AI question. Definitely yes to AI. We like AI. Where was it? Somewhere. Anyway, so yes, definitely AI. But AI is more used in regards to media monitoring and media analysis. And I definitely suggest that you use media AI. You buy services from a company that uses AI when they analyze the media content. So we like artificial intelligence to help us understand better how people they are writing and talking about us.
Thank you, Nicolas. I think we can wrap things after this last question. We have a question. If I have a small business, like a small medical center, is there any simpler plan we can apply to know our institution, reputation, and how to train the employee and get them involved in that?
Yeah, I think for any company, any size, really, obviously you wouldn't spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on doing research if you're a medical center, but definitely go through the same exercise just in a simpler way, in workshop format with some of your key employees, and then communicate about the fact that whatever they do will impact the reputation of the center. And so if people do not perceive the center as being positive, then they will go to another medical center that they believe is positive. So I definitely think that conversation about it with leading employees, I don't know how many employees they have, but I mean, if there are 20 employees, I would have a workshop setting and just talk with them about the impact their reputation can have, and why it's important, and that everything they do has an impact on the way in which people perceive the medical center. So definitely go through the same, where feasible, I would go through the same steps, and I just wouldn't spend money on research. Well,
Nicolas, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge on reputation, and in a lot of areas, it's an eye-opener. We really appreciate you being here tonight. Also, we would like to thank all the audience for dedicating part of their times in this very busy day. It's the start of the weekend, plus it's Ramadan. So thank you all very much. I would like to invite our chairman, Mr. Faisal Al-Dhafiri, to close the session.
Thank you, Nicolas. I'd like also to thank all the audience with us to this night. And it was a really lovely night that we invite Mr. Nicolas for the second time. Nicolas, he came to us also in the same conference long time ago in Jubail Industrial City, but he was here with us. Now, because of this Corona, it is by the internet, by the technology. But we hope that we enjoy with him today with all the marvelous information that he gives us about the reputation. And really, we thank you a lot for the efforts that you bring it to us this night. And I hope the relation between the society and Mr. Nicolas will not stop and only in this conference. We will have it also more. And also, I advise the audience to get benefit from Mr. Nicolas, to invite him to your company's organization to help you in the reputation and to measure the reputation in that. Really, he is a good guy in this field, and we always depend on him in this and the reputation issue. Thank you, Nicolas, and I hope a good night for you and a good night for all our audience. And Turkey, thank you for your effort. And also, I'd like to thank Mr. Hatem Al-Zahrani, the Director of Communication and Media in Royal Commission for Jubail, the member of the society, to support us in this conference and to manage all the details of this conference. and also to thanks for all the guys who help us in this one. Thank you. And I'd like also to thank our partner, Al Khalijiya company, who always help us in the designs, also in all the information about the conference. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed Al-Anizi, for all his efforts that he always give it to this society. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.